Good evening, everybody. Oops. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Books and Books. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Very quickly, if anybody's got a cell phone or anything else that's going to ring out or sing out, if you could put that on silent or vibrate, we'd appreciate that. And to just let everyone know here in the audience know that you will see the lights and cameras around the store. We do live stream on any number of events here at Books and Books. So, of course, while we prefer you to be here, if you cannot be, you can always watch us from the safety of your own laptop. And if you are watching one of these events, you can always call the store and order a book from us, and we'll get it signed for you and ship it to you. That being said, also go to our Books and Books website to check out all of the events we have at Books and Books. This is our newsletter. You can pick up a copy of this out of the counter. This will give you a rundown of all the wonderful events we have at Books and Books. Give us your email address. We can send you a blast, keep you apprised of everything that's going on. Disaster relief and recovery, refugee work, the healthcare crisis, food pantry shortages, the well-being of our veterans, beloved cultural institutions in distress, erosions of privacy, higher education in flux, voting rights concerns, religious organizations in transition, animal rescue. Does a charitable cause you care about need your help and attention? Absolutely. Is volunteer work, board service, or a career change on your list of New Year's resolutions for 2014? If you care about nonprofits and their legal needs, Lesley Rosenthal's Good Counsel, Meeting the Legal Needs of Nonprofits, is your playbook. Never before has the General Counsel of a major organization taken readers on a grand tour that summarizes the legal responsibilities and opportunities of nonprofits. With illustrative examples of human services, higher education, cultural, and other organizations, Good Counsel helps executives, board members, and lawyers avoid mistakes and serve with excellence. Highly relevant for lawyers and nonprofit lawyers alike, Good Counsel distills to their essentials the legal needs of 1 million public charities in the United States, nonprofit corporate law and governance, the tax exemption, and business law topics relevant to program, fundraising, finance, human resources, communications, operations, and more. Lesley Rosenthal leads the legal, governance, and compliance functions of Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. Since 2005, she has fashioned a legal context for the renowned Arts Center's world-class cultural and educational offerings, its entrepreneurial initiatives in media, fashion, and international consulting, and the $1.2 billion redevelopment of its iconic physical complex. Rosenthal has served in many roles throughout the nonprofit sector, including for the New York State Bar Association and its foundation. For 13 years, she was in private practice as a business, litigation, and technology lawyer at Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison in Manhattan. She graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Good Counsel has been nominated for the 2012 Terry McAdam Book Award by the Alliance for Nonprofit Management. The National Organization for Women has named Rosenthal a Women of Power and Influence, and the Association of Media and Entertainment Council has named her Council of the Year for Excellence in the Arts. Please give your warmest Books and Books welcome to Lesley Rosenthal.
Wow, that was a warm welcome. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And I really wanted to thank the folks here at Books and Books, starting with Mitchell and Christina and Steve for putting this event together. And thank you all for coming. I wanted to just start out getting to know the audience a little bit. How many folks are involved currently with nonprofit organizations? That's great. So just about everyone. How many of you are involved as a professional person, an executive in a charitable organization where you work? So the rest of the folks here are volunteers. Is it fair to say volunteering for organizations? Do you serve on boards? Any folks here who are board members of nonprofit organizations? That's great. So there's a lot of goodwill in our communities for serving mission-driven organizations. There's also a lot of curiosity and, frankly, a lot of wonderment about what are we actually doing there? What are these organizations for? What are the rules of the road, the guide rails? And so I wrote this book in plain English for both lawyers and non-lawyers to really understand a little bit better about their nonprofit context. The talk is going to be divided into 3 sections. First, I'm going to give you an overview of what nonprofits are, just to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. And then secondly, since I was told during the course of writing the book that you have to give illustrations or you're going to lose people, I will take you through an illustration of some of the governance and legal and other nonprofit matters that we faced when we were carrying out the $1.2 billion redevelopment of Lincoln Center's complex that was just mentioned. And then at the end, I would love to hear your questions and your comments. I strongly feel that people learn best from each other. I'm teaching this week at the University of Miami Law School, a course that I'm pioneering there and has been picked up elsewhere too, Georgetown and Harvard and other law schools, about the role of in-house counsel at a nonprofit organization. And it's really refreshing to see how excited the students are about serving mission-based organizations, also about learning a different part of the law than they typically learn in the law school curriculum. But I'm finding that the part of this course that they learn the very most from is when they're working together and they're figuring stuff out for themselves. But tonight it's your turn, so let us start with some first principles. What's a nonprofit? Is it like one of those companies that just can't seem to turn a profit and oh, poof, you're a nonprofit? No, not exactly. So a nonprofit organization has a mission. It has a mission to serve the public in some particular way. And so the mission is what distinguishes our for-profit corporations from their nonprofit cousins. So the prime directive for a for-profit corporation is what? To ensure the highest possible value for its owners, that is, a profit to the shareholders that they can flow up to the shareholders as dividends. They put it in their pocket, they walk away, and they go buy a yacht, right? Isn't that the point of a for-profit corporation? A not-for-profit corporation is different. Now, it's not bad if a nonprofit corporation makes a profit. There's nothing wrong with that. A profit is just excess of revenues over expenses. That's a profit. You're in the black that year. The difference is, what do you do with that excess? What you do for a nonprofit organization consistently year after year after year is to plow it back into the nonprofit organization for further realization of its mission. And that's what makes a nonprofit a nonprofit. It has a mission instead of shareholders. May I hear from you what some of the missions are of the organizations that you're involved with? There was one children's organization that you mentioned before. Yes,
It was Miami Rescue Mission.
Miami Rescue Mission for homeless, And was there one over here?
Yeah,
Yes.
the organization I work for is supposed to support young artists at a real critical junction of their development as teenagers into college age.
Marvelous.
And help support them.
Other missions that are present in the room? Yes.
To provide world-class entertainment, education, and advancement and quality of life through the arts for the neighborhood around this cultural center.
Neighborhood development through the arts. Terrific. Any others care to share? There are church-based organizations. There are health and hospital organizations, environmental, civil rights, youth development, senior citizens, veterans, refugees. I mean, you name it. Those are all very important missions that our sector carries out. So depending on the mission and the history and the geographic reach of the organization, it may have different groups of stakeholders, right? Not shareholders, but stakeholders. And you want to make sure that the interest of the organization's ultimate clients, who may be indigent or otherwise disadvantaged, are being served by the organization. And that's what makes the governance of our types of organizations that much more complex. You think about a for-profit organization, the shareholders elect the directors make the decisions, and when they are no longer serving the interests of those shareholders, guess what? They get voted out. Who's going to vote out the members of the board of directors of a nonprofit organization if they are not serving the stakeholders' missions? Gets a lot more complicated. These boards tend to be self-perpetuating. They tend to be appointed by friends and friends of friends, maybe even appointed by the executive director or the senior management team, whose work they are supposed to be providing a check and balance for. And so one of the really important, vital things that we can do for the nonprofit sector is make sure that we all have a really good handle on what are those board members supposed to be doing and how do we measure their efficacy and make sure that they are carrying out their good works. So the Board of Governors, Board of Directors, I use those terms interchangeably, has a very critical oversight function. There are misconceptions that I've heard since I started giving these talks about what board members do. So let me, by a show of hands, tell me if you know of any nonprofits whose board members think that they are primarily there as donors, right? The big pocket, definitely. Fundraisers, right? Or cheerleaders or a rubber stamp. How many people think that the board is there to rubber stamp management? It's all sounding kind of familiar, right? Or they jump in and they run the organization to the extent that management isn't doing such a hot job, right? So these are misconceptions about the role of the board that it's really important for us to get clear on. What about window dressing kind of board members? Like, oh, I have this small shoestring modern dance company, and Mikhail Baryshnikov is the friend of a friend of a friend, and he's agreed to let us put his name on our letterhead. Do we make him a member of our board of directors? Not so fast. Not if he's not going to be able to attend to the business of governing this organization. Now, do you want Mikhail Baryshnikov to be involved in your shoestring modern dance company? Of course you do, right? But you put his name on the letterhead in a different capacity. You call him an artistic advisor, or you put him on an honorary board. But don't put a person like that on your board of governors if they're not going to be in a position to help govern the institution. So now we've talked about what board members aren't. Let's talk about what good board members are. They are there to formulate key policies and strategic goals, focusing on both the near-term and the longer-term challenges and opportunities for the organization. They authorize major transactions, and in some states, this is written into the not-for-profit corporations law. There must be a majority of a board of governors or even a supermajority to enter into certain major transactions. They oversee matters critical to the health of the organization, not the day-to-day decisions or approvals. That's management's role, but those involving fundamental matters, such as the viability of its business model, right? Every nonprofit organization must have a viable economic model. You can't just spend money, no matter how good the cause is, without figuring out how are you going to pay for all those great programs. The integrity of its internal controls. Those are very important matters because if there's an embezzlement scandal at a not-for-profit organization that you care about, you can kiss your donors goodbye. They would much rather put their hard-earned money into an organization that is not going to be in the headlines in ways that are embarrassing and feel wasteful to those donors. Good board members also help to evaluate and manage risks and to identify new or unforeseen or untapped opportunities. So those are the hallmarks of great board members. They help steward the organization's resources for the long run. Yes, they are approving the overall budget for that annual cycle, but they're also encouraging management to look ahead several cycles ahead. 2, 3, 5 years, or maybe in the event of a large capital project like we're about to talk about, 10 years, 25 years, the useful life of these materials and resources for the organization. And then finally, to mentor senior management, to provide resources, that's where the money comes in. Don't get me wrong, I think it's wonderful when board members contribute to the organization. In fact, a lot of people say that it's a sign of a healthy organization when there's 100% financial participation by the board, that everyone is giving something that's meaningful to them. Many boards have a give or get requirement, a set dollar amount. Other boards are more flexible on the dollar amount. It has to be something that's meaningful to you, and they may be looking for other aspects in new board members, whether it's diversity, geographic location, a different part of the sector, whether they need a media person or somebody with a marketing head, or a young person to roll up their sleeves who may have time to devote to the organization and to build up kind of the next generation of board members. So those are the kinds of introductions and resources that good board members are bringing to the organization. You can tell when an organization is entering into a certain stasis when the executives are running the board meetings, when every agenda item has been set by management and is being reported on by management, that's not the sign of a healthy institution. Who's providing the checks and balances if all of those presentations are being made by management, if management are the only ones who are in the know? So you want your board members, really under the leadership of an active board chair, to take the opportunity to receive and discuss these reports, yes, but also to make reports of committees that they may be chairing, and to hear from outside professionals or consultants who may be working with the organization, and speak with them directly. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you've left time at the end for executive sessions. What are executive sessions? That's when you say goodbye to the management representatives from the boardroom so that the board can actually have a frank conversation about how is management doing, particularly when it comes to matters of executive compensation and the fairness of the compensation of management. You want to make sure that those people are not in the room while their own comp is being discussed for obvious reasons. It is a heavily regulated area at the federal level and increasingly at the state level what nonprofits are allowed to pay their management. Because nonprofits, as we talked about, are not there for the private benefit of anyone. And excessive management compensation is considered to be a prohibited form of private inurement. The IRS has set forth a few criteria for how can you tell when an executive is being properly compensated. And one of the criteria is comparing that management's salary to other organizations that are similarly situated, other managers in a similar position, in a similar geographic area. And to have a committee, an independent compensation committee, to make sure that those people who are looking at the manager's salary are not the brother-in-law, the niece, and the uncle of the manager whose work is being reviewed. And of course, something near and dear to the hearts of us lawyers, somebody who's keeping contemporaneous record of the deliberations of the compensation committee to make sure that their deliberations were accurately recorded and become a permanent part of the organization's record. So those are some of the ways in which a well-functioning board can exercise their independent oversight. We have economic models, just like a for-profit business has economic models. We have profit and loss statements for every different line of business. We have several different forms of revenue, so we tend to have a more dynamic blend of types of revenue. I would say really there's three types of revenues that nonprofits enjoy. The first is earned revenue, the second is contributed revenue, and then the third is investment. So let's talk a little bit about examples of earned revenue. All right, I'm going to make this into a classroom now. So if you're running a symphony orchestra, what's your earned revenue? Ticket sales, exactly. And if you are running a hospital, what's your primary source of earned revenue? Don't say the gift shop.
Insurance.
Yeah, the fee for services, whether paid privately or through insurance or through a government program. And for our beloved universities, what's their source of earned revenue? Right, tuition payments, exactly. So you can see that for different types of nonprofit organizations, their earned revenue streams are going to be different, and also they're going to make up a larger or smaller portion of that nonprofit's revenue stream. So for example, if you're primarily servicing indigent people, you're not going to be charging them for your services, but you may be the recipient of certain government grants or reimbursements. So that brings us to contributed revenue. So if you are throwing the gala dinner for the young person's arts organization, right, that's a source of contributed revenue. To the extent that the price of the ticket to the gala exceeds the price of the cost of the actual dinner. And that's why you get those receipts saying, thank you for your $250 or $250,000 if your organization's fundraisers are very ambitious. Thank you for your $250 contribution to this dinner, of which $200 is deductible from your taxes. That's what that's about. Friends of the Zoo membership groups and so forth, that's another regularly recurring stream of contributed revenue. End of year solicitations, of course, we all get those around December, take advantage, it's tax time and so forth. That is a very welcome stream of contributed revenue. It can also cause the cash flow to be very lumpy. For nonprofit organizations that have consistent needs all year long, or maybe even, say, for a homeless shelter in a colder climate, you may have exceptional demand for your services in the cold weather months and not get your contributed revenue until much later in the year. And so a big part of what good management and oversight by the board is to really help to smooth out and plan for those cycles. Then for investment returns, which is really a third source of revenue for wealthier nonprofits that have endowments. Are we familiar with what endowments are? It's the nest egg of a nonprofit organization where people have put in sums of money into a principal, which is to be held by the organization and never spent down, except in very special circumstances. But you can invest that principal, and the dividends that it throws off, the growth that it achieves, can be spent by the organization. And that can help to feed an operating budget of an organization pretty substantially. So if you've got an organization with $100 million endowment and a 5% spending policy on that, all of a sudden you've got this stream of revenue that can help to feed the operating budget year after year after year. In harsh economic climates, what happens to those sources of revenue, right? Right, there's a high correlation between reduced contributions and weaker investment returns, and for that matter, oftentimes for nonprofits whose earned revenue is based on dollars that people may or may not be able to spend that year on entertainment or arts type of activities. All three of your sources of revenue are going to be down in the same year. Social services organizations in particular may find that there's a heightened demand for their services at the very same time that there's a decreased revenue stream coming in. And so these are all matters that really create difficulty for the nonprofit sector, trouble balancing budgets, even creating persistent deficits. Economic forces require nonprofits sometimes to expand into new lines of activity, create new streams of revenue, diversify their traditional bases of earned and contributed, and some of the examples that I will show you are efforts that Lincoln Center has been making to create what we call a diversified or a third stream of revenue. Nonprofit board members are being asked to play more of a business-oriented role. Help us dream up the next line of revenue. Help us put together a business plan that makes sense to you because you're a successful business person. Help us vet who we're going to bring in to help us carry out this new line. Help us think strategically. Help us revitalize. Help us diversify. The board needs to be deeply engaged in the lean years and in the growth years. So that's kind of what nonprofits do and how they do it. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the legal framework. And I'll preface this by saying that I believe that the law belongs to everyone. I try to make sure that the law is accessible in language that everyone can understand so that nobody can say, oh, you know, I wasn't paying attention to that, because that's the lawyer's problem. Actually, some lawyers told me not to write the book, or not to write it in plain English, because they were worried that nonprofit leaders were going to take the book and ditch the lawyers and not go out and get actual legal advice. And so part of my effort here is to really just help non-lawyers issue spot, to know where the legal questions even arise, and to tell them what types of lawyers or legal advice they may need to seek and point them to places where they might find it. Now, I have a certain reputation in New York as a shameless consumer of pro bono legal resources. In fact, 3 of my finest purveyors are in this room right now. Lincoln Center has been fortunate to be able to create and sustain close to $2 million a year in free legal services being provided by generous outside pro bono counsel in every area that our legal problems arise, whether it's corporate governance, real estate, building codes, intellectual property, labor and employment, even revising our contracts from time to time. These are all matters that we've been very fortunate to have outside legal counsel help us with. And I'll tell you a secret. There's more lawyers out there that want to help nonprofits, and they just haven't been asked yet. So one of the chapters in here is how to ask a lawyer for free legal advice. And I'll tell you another secret. I found this out from personal experience. There's more lawyers that want to provide free legal help than there are clients who have self-identified their own legal needs. That is literally true. So I know this because I was approached before I wrote the book by the president of the New York State Bar Association and the Attorney General's office in New York, the Charities Bureau. They said, "Oh, we heard about what you did at Lincoln Center, Lesley, you know, all that pro bono work you're getting. Care to share? You know, there's lots of smaller nonprofits upstate and in distressed areas that could really use a little bit of help. Would you help us put together a coterie of lawyers that are willing to help and nonprofit organizations that need the help?" I said, "Great idea. Let's scale it up. Let's see if it works. I have a feeling that there's more out there that can be done. What kind of training materials do you have in mind? You don't think that you're really just going to put a well-intentioned lawyer together with a charity that's never worked with a lawyer before and think that, you know, beautiful music is going to happen, do you?" And they kind of looked at me blankly like, "Yeah, well, there's a couple of websites and there's this little brochure we have." And I was like, "Yeah, there needs to be a book." And so I started looking around. I was actually on vacation with my husband in Hawaii. He's long-suffering. He was trying to enjoy, you know, the drinks by the pool. And I'm looking up on my Kindle to see what kind of books there are out there about meeting the legal needs of nonprofits. And I couldn't find anything. There's the 900-page treatise just on the governance stuff that I was talking about. And then there were a couple of websites here and there, but there was nothing that really took the comprehensive overview of what legal problems and topics are going to come up time and time and time again for all nonprofits, regardless of size. Forget about the Lincoln Centers and the Metropolitan Operas. I mean, and let's talk about the food pantry, and let's talk about the animal rescue shelter, and let's talk about the youth development group in a small town. They have the same type of legal needs as the huge ones do. They need somebody to look at their contracts. They need somebody who's actually signing the contracts to know what they're signing. And if there are things, contingent liabilities, obligations, automatic renewals, licenses, representations, and warranties that are embedded in those contracts, somebody needs to be explaining that stuff to the managers who are going to be carrying out those contracts. All too often, you see nonprofit organizations entering into contracts, signing somebody else's form of agreement, and then they stick the thing in a drawer and they forget about it until something goes wrong. So that's an important area. Fundraising, another critically important area. So contracts chapter 4, fundraising chapter 5. You can't just go and stick your hand out, even if it's a worthwhile cause, and say, "Please donate money to my charity. I'm going to spend it and help do the public good." Nice thought, doesn't work that way. First of all, there are some charities that are not as well-intentioned as all of that, and they give the rest of us a bad name. Second of all, most of the states actually have fundraising registration requirements. You cannot solicit charitable funds from the public in the state of Florida, New York, or most other states without first filing paperwork with the Attorney General's office or the Secretary of State or the Department of Consumer Protection in that state. And then, moreover, you need to be carrying out certain accountability functions about what did you really do with the money compared to what did you tell the general public you were going to do with that money. So there may be monies being raised for hurricane relief or for shooting victims, but how does anybody know that those monies are really going to where they were promised to go? For small startup-y organizations that may have the best of intentions, they're not trying to rook anyone, but they get these checks come in the middle of a disaster faster than they know what to do with them, and they just cash them and cash them and cash them, and their money's going out the door. But nobody's really like putting it all together, lining it up in the books and records in ways that are going to make sense when that auditor comes down the pike. So fundraising, very heavily regulated area. And for lawyers that want to transition into nonprofit management, there are a lot of opportunities here as grant writers, because you take that oral persuasion or good, clear writing and you convert that into give us money to help this great organization. Very clear transition of that skill set. If you understand trusts, bequests, wills, you are a dream fundraiser for an organization that's going after major gifts. So lots of opportunities here in the fundraising area, both for learning about compliance and for learning about actually raising the money. The areas that I'm also concentrating on in subsequent chapters pertain to labor and employment law. I mean, just because you're doing the Lord's work doesn't mean that you don't have to comply with the equal opportunity laws and the Americans with Disabilities Act and so forth. I tell some of the nonprofit leaders when I give this book talk that just because you're tax exempt doesn't mean you're law exempt. And so that's really chapter by chapter what I tried to do is take each of these areas of the law, put them in plain English, explain what the mandate or the requirement is, and then I put work plans at the end, checklists as well as work plans so that you could work through that particular area of your nonprofit organization and just do a checkup. And make sure that that area is either where it should be in terms of knowing your legal needs or provide a roadmap of how to get there. So that's the theory, and I wanted to show you some pretty pictures because when I sent around my draft chapters, first I sent them to the lawyers that know these areas to make sure that I had written the law correctly, and then I sent each chapter to nonprofit leaders I know who were friends of mine to make sure, A, that it was understandable, the law belongs to everyone, and B, that their eyes weren't glazing over. And they were very frank with me, and they, this is getting a little boring right here, and how about that? It needs to be jazzed up with an example or two. And I really learned in the process of writing the book about the power of storytelling and illustrative examples. So here's my favorite example of the range of legal needs and nonprofit corporate governance in 57 very quick slides. I can't see the slides from here, so I could move. That works too. Thank you. Great. Okay. This was originally put together as a fundraising pitch, so and we still need about $16-20 million to complete the campaign, so if anybody's got it in their back pocket, you just let me know. I can see, but I think you may be in between the clicker and the computer. There we go. Okay. So that is you're good. That is a map to situate you of our 16 acres on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. You may know that Lincoln Center is made up of 11 different nonprofit organizations. We like to think of them as the best in their field. They are the Metropolitan Opera, the New York Philharmonic, the New York City Ballet, the Film Society of Lincoln Center, the Juilliard School, Jazz at Lincoln Center. We've got 2 branches of the New York Public Library, Lincoln Center Theater, and the School of American Ballet, Chamber Music Society. It's just a wonderful constellation of what we call the best in the performing arts for the greatest possible number. We were incorporated in 1956. and the groundbreaking occurred in 1959, and the original buildings were completed 10 years later in 1969. About a generation later, in 1998, the board established a committee called the Committee for the 21st Century. Doesn't that sound dated? But it sounded very forward-looking at the time, to examine Lincoln Center's future needs. And the first thing it wisely did was to negotiate a $240 million contribution from the city of New York to work up plans and to have the funds to carry out plans, since the center is owned as a patchwork, partially by Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, Inc., my organization, and the outdoor area is owned by the City of New York, operated and managed by Lincoln Center. There was vigorous discussion and debate, some of which you may have read about because it erupted into the front pages of the New York Times. After recovering from both the debate and also following that, the devastating effects of 9/11, subsequent downturn, significant downturn in visitors, tourist traffic, and so forth, the plans for redevelopment finally emerged, and we had 4 successive, really visionary board chairs in turn: Beverly Sills, Bruce Crawford, Frank Bennick, and our current chair, Catherine Farley, under the leadership of our then President Ronald Levy, to carry out the projects that you're about to see. I feel like I'm trying to open my garage door here. There we go. This is what Alice Tully Hall looked like before the redevelopment. It's a 1,100-seat theater. It was opened in 1969, and when you walk past it, you would not necessarily have even stopped, let alone thought that some of the world's greatest performances were going on there. You can see the architecture is kind of squat and Soviet looking. There's nothing particularly welcoming about the outside of this building. And that's an after picture. That is not a rendering. That is what Alice Tully Hall looks like from the same angle now that it's undergone redevelopment. And the themes that I wanted to really elicit for you here are the themes of transparency, welcoming, openness, public safety. So we've maintained the art's purpose of this, but we've just made the hall so much more welcoming for visitors. What we did to bring this about was to enlarge the welcoming sequence, the lobby, and also to uplift it. You'll see it looks like the prow of a ship, and to provide better lighting. And in subsequent slides, you'll see that we actually stripped out the travertine marble at eye level from end to end, from 65th Street and Columbus to 65th Street and Amsterdam. And we replaced all of that marble with glass. Now, what's the purpose of that? We're an institution that is about great art for the many, and yet we've got this facade that says, well, what does marble say? It says, keep out, right? Abandon hope, ye who enter here. So you're going to see kind of a vision of our organization really rendered in architecture. That was Tully Hall Plaza, the part that you would just walk by before. Really nothing in particular to stop by and look at. That was the interior, quite dark and forbidding. That's what the interior of it looks like now. So glass, light, this wood veneer that's very warm. It feels much more welcoming. There's much more space to circulate, maybe to bump into an artist or a neighbor. You know how it is in New York. You live in apartment 13F and you've never actually met the person who lives in 13E. Maybe this is a gathering space. This is what the old box office looked like. Again, it's like if you have to ask, you'll never know. I don't know what to ask for when I get there. I'm afraid I'm going to sound like an ignoramus if I ask for the wrong thing. And so here you've got a much more gracious and much more handicapped accessible box office with LED tickers that are showing you actually what's playing there. This is what the inside of the concert hall looked like, and it was beautiful in its time, and its acoustics were terrific, and one of our biggest challenges was to make sure that we didn't upset the acoustical balance inside the hall. And that's what it looks like today. We took the wood from one tree in Africa, and it was sent to Japan and cut a micron thick and wrapped in echo resin with acoustical properties, and then sent to New York in pieces and installed here by milliners. And because of the unity of sound, the one tree, you feel like you're sitting inside a Stradivarius when you're listening to live acoustical music playing inside that concert hall. I could be speaking to you in these tones, no mic, on the stage. You would hear me in the balcony. This was the view down 65th Street in the bad old days. You can even see the 188-foot heavy pedestrian foot plaza that was darkening the roadway. And that's what the streetscape looks like now with the glass replacing the travertine marble. That was underneath the 188-foot pedestrian roadway, and that was the main entrance to the Lincoln Center Theater, where these Tony Award-winning plays were being put on. That's how you welcome visitors to a wonderful Broadway house in New York. Whoops. Yeah. Gosh, I think I just skipped a whole bunch of slides. But anyway, this is the entrance now to the Juilliard School. You used to walk under that footbridge and not even realize that you were in the presence of the world's leading up-and-coming artists. We dropped their entrance down to grade. We ripped out the foot plaza. We put glass in everywhere. And the Juilliard kids put on 600 free concerts a year. It was the best-kept secret in New York. It was like the easiest thing in the world to... I'm really sorry, because now, you know, the people who are in the know are no longer going to be able to get their tickets so easily. But let me show you, after we got rid of the foot plaza and replaced it with glass, you will see what the opening of the box office looks like behind the glass. We also decided that we needed digital signage, and so we put in these moving, we call them video blades, images, up and down the south side of 65th Street. There's 13 of them. They can show images turning what's on the stages out into the street, and it can be all the same image, or it can be different images representing our different genres. And that's a summary of what 65th Street looks like today. There was an entry stair that was impossible to discern and not anything in particular to write home about. And now the entry stair is actually informing you of what's playing at Lincoln Center that night. This was the view across the North Plaza. This is one of my favorite before shots because it shows what the architects called the neo-brutalist style of architecture with which this was originally developed. And look, I'm sure it was very expressive of the time in the 50s and 60s of the difficulty of life and the Cold War and all that stuff, but for an art center, not too inviting, right? Not too many blades of grass there. There's no campus green. There's the occasional tree in these planter boxes, but there's really no kind of gathering force of shade, of communal being together. And this is what it looks like now. So we put in this sloping, kind of rakish roof lawn on top of a new restaurant. Of course, we kept the reflecting pool with the Henry Moore sculpture inside. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a tree arbor that was placed there so that people could enjoy free outdoor concerts, take a book out of the library, and just enjoy the gathering space. It's all got free wireless internet access as well. The sloping roof lawn is actually the subject of the cover of Good Counsel, and I have a legal story to tell you about that before we go to the Q&A. So the architectural critic from the Washington Post came up to New York after all this work was done, and he was raving about the work. And it's open, and it's transparent, and they did a great job, and they brought it in on time and on budget, and all the art centers in the country should take a page. All the art centers in the country should take a page out of Lincoln Center's book. And he loved Alice Tully Hall, and he loved the glass, and he loved the digital signage, and all that stuff. But he saved his best praise for the roof lawn. He said the following: "It looks fresh, adolescent, and fun. It looks like the lawyers never got to it." So now let me tell you how the lawyers really did deal with this, right? This design was showed by our visionary design architect, Liz Diller, at a board meeting, and our board members were utterly captivated. It's this sloping shape. She calls it a hyperbolic paraboloid. I call it a potato chip. And it's got an entrance, and it's got places to hang out. It's a real campus green. And underneath it is this restaurant. So the board members loved it, except for the two of them who were lawyers, and they looked at me with daggers in their eyes, like, "You're not going to let them do this, are you?" Right? So I called in a couple of consultants. I called our insurance people. I called some engineers. I called in a biomechanics expert. I called him the tripologist, to just study this thing, make sure it was safe. Nobody's going to fall through the roof onto the laps of the people dining in the restaurant below. Nobody's going to fall off of the edge of it or be able to throw stuff off of that onto the people in the street below. And people are going to be able to ascend and descend safely. And they made a couple of comments. They said, "Why don't you put in like a barrier around the outside, but make it clear so you don't wreck the look of it?" Fine. Why don't you put handrails along there so people can hold on if they are having balance problems? Great idea. Why don't you cut in some steps into the steepest part of the grade as you're walking up there from the plaza so that people can really ascend and use it safely? Fine. So this is the rendering. That's the reality. It's not that far off. It was, in fact, invisible to the architectural critic of the Washington Post. So I decided that was a new high bar for lawyers serving the legal needs of nonprofits, is to do your job, find a responsible way to make the answer be yes, but do it invisibly so that nobody notices. All right, you've seen a lot of pretty pictures and listened to a lot of polysyllabic words about governance, and I would love to hear from you now about the redevelopment, about your own board work, volunteer service, legal work, opportunities to transition or serve into the nonprofit sector.
Who are the architects?
Liz Diller of Diller, Scafidio, and Renfro. She also did the High Line in New York as well.
So, maybe it was a year or two ago, I was reading an article about the fashion show in Damrush Park, and there was another group that started, I think it was called the Friends of Damrush Park, and they were challenging whether the New York the fashion show could go and take up all the space and effectively kick the public out of that space. When you have a third-party group kind of taking ownership of an issue, how does the nonprofit kind of what is the relationship between the main nonprofit and the challenging nonprofit?
Right.
What
It's
is the legal issue?
interesting. There are legal issues between nonprofits. I give some examples of this in the book about two different veterans organizations that laid claim to the Wounded Warrior's name. And it's a different type of litigation when it's between two public interest organizations. I don't see either side really burning the barn down or scorching the earth in that situation, because they are all serving public interests in the plural. So in that case, we've been giving a lot of thought to the proper use of all of our outdoor spaces and how they can be fully accessible to the broadest possible audience for the largest part of the year, while at the same time maintaining the arts nature of the space. It's not a basketball court. It is part of an art center. And just to make sure that we are properly balancing and communicating with community groups about all those different interests.
There always seems to be a fine line between the legal counsel and what we call risk management, because there are things that often are put into contracts that serve the protection of the organization or a liability issue, and then you have to sometimes look at them as, are they good business decisions or smart? I mean, you're at Lincoln Center, you hire an individual artist, you're doing something outside on an outdoor stage, and this person is an individual artist, so they don't carry a liability policy that you would ask for from a large institution. So you have to then kind of make those decisions internally, but at the same time, it's a very, I find it difficult to know, who am I asking? Do I ask the risk person? Do I ask the legal person? Is this something that, because you're changing a document if you take it out, but in essence, sometimes something as simple as that is a risk. So I guess it's not really a question, but where do you stand when things need to be taken within a standardized contract or standardized agreement, and then changes need to be made?
It's an interesting complex of issues. Let me try to mention a few of them, and I'll try to tackle them. One is about risk management and how good risk management principles are embedded into the organization's form contracts. And the people who are administering these contracts are probably not lawyers. We have a tiny legal team. There's only 3 lawyers in an organization of 500 employees. And we couldn't possibly look at every contract. And
Your organization?
yes,
Oh my God.
and so we've put in certain kind of pre-approved, you could call them boilerplate form provisions that include risk management that we know would be acceptable, that are accounted for in our financial statements, in our budgets, and in our insurance arrangements. And in some cases, our insurers are telling us which risks to shift in order to maintain a certain level of premium, or if the premium, or if we change that, the premium could go up. So some of that is kind of hard-bound. A big part of that challenge for legal is to just convey to the non-lawyers, what does it all mean? I mean, people's eyes just bug out when they see this indemnification clause. They don't even know what that one word means, let alone what the rest of the gobbledygook does. And so part of what I've done in here is to actually explode an indemnification provision and just talk about what each of those words mean in a context that people running an arts organization or another type of nonprofit can understand what's at stake. Now, how do you handle it when somebody wants to change it? How do you arrange them in the first instance? Those are a combination of business and legal decisions that really need to be surfaced and discussed, not just once, but on an ongoing basis. And the more opportunities you take for regular discussion of those matters, the better served the organization is. Now, here's the plus and the minus. Most nonprofit organizations are understaffed relative to the size of their impact, the importance, frankly, in my personal view, of what they do, and the size of their business. So I defy you to find a for-profit organization that has a similar impact and footprint to ours that has a legal department of 3. Nowhere. That's the bad news. The good news is that it forces all of us to get a lot closer with each other. I work like this with the head of finance. I work like this with the head of human resources. I work like this with the head of operations. I work like this with the head of security and the head of programming and so forth, so that if they do have an artist who's saying, I couldn't possibly get insurance to cover whatever it is you're expecting me to do, or she dropped her Stradivarius down the steps, now what? You know, or they were going to do fireworks, or a trapeze artist, or they wanted a zebra, or whatever it is, we're in constant contact with each other to make sure that that stuff doesn't either get assumed away or slip by. Do we have time for a couple more? Okay.
At what point do you think nonprofits should consider engaging in or obtaining in-house counsel? Are there any sort of benchmarks that you would identify that a nonprofit should consider?
The question is, are there benchmarks that are the telltale sign that a nonprofit organization needs to have in-house counsel? It's a fine question. At the moment, we're so far away from that as a sector. the lawyer is probably the 100th hire, sometimes the 200th hire, right? The head of finance, the head of accounting, the head of fundraising, the head of marketing, the head of a program, those are all the first people in the door, and the legal is almost an afterthought. So at the moment, well, like, when isn't it too late to have in-house counsel? But, I think once the institution has an ongoing base of operations, particularly if it has a physical facility where a lot of these risk issues arise. But if it happens to be in a regulated area like a blood bank or human services, you certainly need somebody who's coordinating on a consistent basis the legal picture of that organization. Now, there is an intermediate step, and that is that you could hire outside general counsel. And there are a number of law firms that provide outside general counsel services to nonprofit organizations. And there are even a few law firms that are willing to do so on a pro bono basis. Now, that's a trickier ask because it's kind of a blank check. The institution probably doesn't know what its legal needs are, and it doesn't know how to interact with a lawyer responsibly to get the legal advice and to work it through the operations of the organization. But there are important steps that organizations should take earlier on than maybe they think to get somebody in charge of their legal needs. Working through the different work plans of the chapters of this book will be a telltale sign for many organizations, for many nonprofit leaders to say, oh my gosh, we have fundraising compliance issues. Oh my gosh, we have building codes and operations issues. Oh my gosh, we don't even have a personnel manual, and she thinks we should have one when we only have 4 employees, and we left 4 employees behind 10 years ago. So the work plans, which are also, by the way, available online for free, so you can share them with clients, share them with other people on your board, will help you know when your organization has reached that point. Last question.
Do you have standard advice on term limits for directors of self-perpetuating boards of non-for-profits?
Is there standard advice for term limits for members of the board, touching back on a theme from the beginning of the talk about, yes, the boards tend to be self-perpetuating, and there isn't really kind of a self-refreshing mechanism. There's differing views on that. There are some organizations that have 3-year terms but no limits. There are organizations that might have a 10-year term limit, and after that you automatically cycle off the board, even if you continue to be a productive member of the board, even if you're still contributing, you're still governing, you're still active in the affairs of the institution. My personal view of that is that a board member should serve for only as long as they continue to faithfully discharge the obligations that we talked about, the fiduciary duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, and continue to be involved in the life of the institution. We've got some beloved members of our board who continue to meet that description after 32 years. Why would anybody want to get rid of them? There are people who come in a flash of glory in their first year, and they're so excited, and they come to every board meeting, and after that, we never saw them again. So I really think that it's a question of what I call good board hygiene, of having your board chair really take a good look together with your nominating and governance committee at each and every board member's performance against their goal. One of the best governed organizations that I know of has a compact with each and every board member. At the beginning of the fiscal year, that board member fills out a form saying, this is what I intend to do for this institution in the coming year. It goes out 6 months later, just reminding you, this is what you promised to do. And at the end of the 12 months, they are filling out a self-evaluation, which go into the nominating governance committee. And at that point, you don't even have to ask the non-functioning ones to get off the board because they know it. Right. Okay, well, I just wanted to thank you so much for your attention to these vital issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesley. Unfortunately, I don't want to rain on the spirit of the proceedings, but Books and Books is a for-profit institution, a little bit anyway. So we do have copies of Lesley's book, Behind the Counter. Buy a copy. She'll sign it for you here. Those of you watching online, give us a call. We'll get one signed for you and ship it to you. Thank you all very much for coming.